So if we total all of that up, it comes to a grand total of Hi all, welcome back to Chlome. I hope you're doing well. Today's video is all about the costs and finances associated with buying your first home, because before I completed on this purchase, before I even stepped foot in the door, it had already cost me thousands, and I think that's really important for you to know, especially if you're embarking on this process for the first time. I must admit, I've been asked so many times about how much it costs to purchase the house, how much I should budget for renovations, and historically I've really shied away from answering it just because culturally it's not really the British way to talk about finances. However, it is something that I'm actively learning because it's information I would have found so invaluable when I was starting out and still do. And so I think it's such a huge part of the budgeting and the planning process that it's really important for you to know and for people like me to share. So let's go through how much it costs. Grab yourself a cup of tea. I've actually got mine here. Get yourself a notepad if you will, and let's break down how much it cost me to purchase and renovate my first home. That's good. So first things first, let's start with the buying part. My deposit was a huge chunk of my initial purchase costs, and mine came to a whopping, drum roll, £57,000. It's a lot of money, and I saved a lot post-university for about 4 to 5 years. I was living at home at the time and I was really disciplined in doing so. If you want me to go into more detail in terms of how I did it, how much I budgeted every month, how much I saved every month, and how I tracked it, please let me know, because I think that will form a video in itself, and it's really, really important, especially if you're preparing. I just grabbed my phone to check all the figures because it's worth noting that of that £57,000, £7,660 was contributed via the Help to Buy ISA, of which £6,128 was money that I actively saved into the pot, and £1,532 was provided via the government's 25% bonus. So at the time, there was a Help to Buy ISA, and it was a government scheme. Now I believe it's been replaced by the Lifetime ISA, which has very common factors and is definitely worth looking into. There are some differences, and again, I can go into what that actually looks like and things to watch out for. I definitely think it's something you should explore, especially if the government are willing to contribute 25% of that money that you save into your deposit. So long story short, I transferred that money to my solicitors. They subsequently apply it for your Help to Buy, now Lifetime bonus via the government, and they transferred that in the sale. And I must admit, that was definitely something that was really hard to contend with, because psychologically you go from building your deposit up and your savings up month and month over a span of X amount of years, and in doing so you kind of formulate a sense of pride and security. So when you transfer it, you literally watch all of that money completely deplete, and psychologically at the time that was a lot for me to deal with, because all of a sudden I had not much left and you've got this massive responsibility. So I definitely think that's something to consider and to prepare yourself for, because inevitably you're just gonna have to do it. So make sure that mentally you're also prepared for it. Next we have my solicitor fees, which came to £1,650. Again, this is a tricky one when you're first starting out because you don't really have a reference point. Mine was recommended by a friend who had used them previously. At the time it was pre-AI being actively used, and I kind of wanted someone who would handhold me through the process. Mine were based outside of London, so although I'm based in London, they were outside of London, which I think helps it to be a little bit more affordable. But with that comes the, I suppose, the nuisances of having to post documents to them. For most things, I could send a digital scanned copy to them. However, for some things, they needed to see the original signed version, which means a couple of trips to my local post office to send something via recorded delivery to where they're based. So that's definitely something you should factor in. It usually is more affordable if you go out of your immediate area or outside of London, but definitely factor in the time and effort effort costs associated with the back and forth. I did get some more quotes at the time and they were all pretty similar, so I think that was pretty much the average. Make sure when you do find your quotes, double check what's included in that fee. So for instance, searches and ID checks, because if they don't, those can also add up. Next we have my mortgage arrangement fee. Mine came to £995, so just shy of £1,000. It was something that I only found out partway through the process because it really depends on which mortgage lender and product you go with, but it just also feels like one of those unnecessary admin fees that they kind of lumber in the small print. So definitely prepare for that. You can choose as to whether you want to add it to your mortgage or to pay it up front. So if you don't have the cash available, you can add it to your mortgage. If you have the cash available, you can choose to pay it up front. Completely up to you most of the time. However, something to note is if you pay it up front and you've also got a renovation to do, for instance, that's a chunk of money that you have to take out of that pot. Or equally, if you choose to add it to your mortgage, you will also have to pay interest on that amount. So in my case, £995, in line with the rest of your mortgage. So definitely just weigh that up when you're going through all the costs and figures. I chose to just pay mine up front just to get it out of the way. Next we have my broker fees, which came to £0, which was a small win at the time. Mine came recommended by a friend who had used them previously. She was great, but equally I was a really straightforward 9 to 5 applicant who had my deposit saved and had my ISA and so forth. And it's also worth noting that although they don't cost you anything, sometimes they're still being paid via commission via the lender. So when they find you a product and they make that match and then you ultimately complete, they will also get a small fee. Some brokers can cost a little bit more depending on your circumstances, and I would say anywhere between £300 to about £1,000. So make sure you shop around before you commit to who you want to go with. And it's also worth noting that you don't have to go with the banks. You can also shop around and find a reputable broker who has access to the whole of the market and can find you the best deal for you and your circumstances. Up next we have the survey. Now I had a level 3 building survey which cost me £750, and that's supposed to be the most detailed survey, the one that kind of tells you everything about the home. It didn't, which I'm sure you know now, but that's a story for another day. But it was the highest level that I could get at the time. You could also get a home buyer survey, which is almost like their mid-tier, and that will tell you what's wrong or right with the property but in less detail. And then you typically have a valuation survey, which is undertaken anyway by your lender, and they just check against your purchase price and market right value just to make sure that they are aligned. If you're going for a fixer-upper, I would always suggest going for a building survey, just because you're going to need to know that information anyway, so why not know up front? And also, if you do find any defects with the property that you weren't aware of or weren't listed when the property was listed, you can also use that to negotiate the price down with your sellers. Okay, so on the theme of surveys, I also had an asbestos survey done, and that came to £222. That was because it was flagged in my building survey that there may have been asbestos in the main bedroom ceiling. I don't know if you remember, but there was Artex all over the ceiling, and historically that could also contain asbestos. So he recommended I had an additional survey done to check for it. They did check the ceiling, and they also checked somewhere in the loft space as well. Turns out there was no asbestos, thank God, in those areas, although they did find asbestos via their sampling in the external soffits. So again, really useful to know. I was able to negotiate a little bit off the price on that basis, and it's a small price to pay just for your peace of mind. Next we have stamp duty, which is the bane of a lot of purchasers' lives, but mine at the time it came to nil quoi, nothing, which was amazing. It was a small rare win. It was a point in time where we had the stamp duty holiday. It just created so much demand and buzz and everyone was moving, and equally I was a first time buyer, so I just didn't have anything to pay, which is brilliant. Honestly, I'm praying they bring that back because it was such a good time, and I think it would be amazing for the economy, so why not, right? So lastly we have the completion day costs, and if you remember, I couldn't actually get access to my house on day one just because because I had awful cellars. And so I had to call out a locksmith to gain access and also to give me an additional key. That cost came to £150. And then equally, if you are using a lender, you have a mortgage, you're typically required to make sure that you have insurance and at the minimum building insurance. So mine came to £30 a month from day one. I think typically you get it at the point of exchange, just to make sure you're protected from that point onwards. So I had that, which is £30, and it's a rolling amount every month. So if we total all of that up, it comes to a grand total of £60,767, which sounds like a lot of money, and it is, especially if you've also got a renovation to budget for and plan ahead. So definitely, if you're saving for your first time, bear that in mind, and also prepare yourself for the fact that the pre-completion cost is just the beginning. It's also worth noting that when you're saving for your first home, it really is circumstantial. So if you're buying something that is smaller or costs a little bit less money, everything is going to be relative. Equally, the amount that you can borrow is determined on how much you earn, and it's typically 4 to 5 times your salary. So it could be that you don't have to put down as much money in your deposit, or you could choose to put down more money because it typically gives you a better interest rate. There's so many different variables to consider, and that's why it's really important, I cannot stress this enough, to make sure you find a really good broker that truly looks into your circumstances and what makes the most sense for you. So that would be my main takeaway, because you can do that at any stage. Just to understand, number one, where you're at today, but also what you need to do to plan for where you want to be. So if you like that, please let me know in the comments below. If you'd find any other information really useful, especially in the pre-purchase costs, again, let me know, because I can delve in any of this in more detail. I will save the renovation costs for the next video. If you want, in the meantime, you're more than welcome to guess in the comments below how much you think you would need to budget for everything that I've done in my house in terms of renovation costs, because it will be really interesting to know what you think it would be versus what it ultimately is, and I will definitely share that in my next video. So as always, like, comment, subscribe, turn your notifications on, look out for the next video, and I can't wait to catch up with you soon. Until then, take care and bye.